It was 2 a.m. in Caracas. The city was sleeping, but the radar screens at the Maiquetía International Airport were lit up like a Christmas tree. For years, the world wondered if the United States would ever pull the trigger. For years, threats were exchanged on Twitter, sanctions were signed in Washington, and red lines were drawn in the sand. But at 2 a.m. this morning, the rhetoric stopped, and the kinetic action began. In a coordinated lightning strike, multiple explosions ripped through strategic military bases surrounding the Venezuelan capital. But this wasn't a coup. This wasn't a local uprising. This was the full force of the United States military. Within hours, the impossible had happened. Nicolás Maduro, the man who defied 3 U.S. presidents, was gone. Plucked from the Miraflores Palace along with his wife, Celia Flores, and flown via helicopter to the deck of the USS Iwo Jima, waiting in the Caribbean Sea. By sunrise, Donald Trump stood before the cameras and announced that the United States is now arguably in charge of Venezuela. He called it a temporary transition. The rest of the world calls it an invasion. One military operation, one single night. The regime has fallen. But as the smoke clears over Caracas, a terrifying question is echoing across the halls of power in Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran. If they can do this to Venezuela, who is next? To understand the gravity of what just happened, we have to analyze how it happened. This operation, likely codenamed by the Pentagon long ago, fits the textbook definition of a decapitation strike. In modern warfare, you don't fight the entire army. You cut off the head. According to military analysts, the operation likely began not with missiles but with code. U.S. Cyber Command would have initiated a massive electronic warfare attack, blinding Venezuelan air defense radars. This allowed low-flying stealth assets, likely from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, to enter Venezuelan airspace undetected. The launch pad was the USS Iwo Jima. While officially in the region for counter-narcotics patrols, a narrative the U.S. has pushed since 2020, it was effectively a floating fortress. The extraction of Maduro wasn't a negotiation, it was a snatch-and-grab. By bypassing the Venezuelan military's chain of command, the U.S. avoided a prolonged civil war on the ground. They didn't want to conquer the land, they wanted the man. But why capture him? Why not just target the palace with a drone strike? Because the United States didn't just want a regime change, they wanted a trial. As Nicolás Maduro sits in a holding cell, likely already en route to the Southern District of New York, he isn't being processed as a prisoner of war. He is being processed as a drug trafficker. This is the critical piece of the puzzle that legitimizes the U.S. narrative. Back in March 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed an indictment charging Maduro and 14 other high-ranking officials with narco-terrorism, corruption, and drug trafficking. The U.S. government claims Maduro is the leader of the Cartel de los Soles, Cartel of the Suns, a criminal organization embedded within the Venezuelan military. The allegation is that for 2 decades, they conspired with Colombian rebels, the FARC, to flood the United States with cocaine, using it as a weapon to destabilize American society. There was a $15 million bounty on his head. By framing this invasion as a law enforcement operation to capture a narcotics kingpin, Washington is trying to bypass international law regarding sovereignty. They are saying, we didn't invade a country, we arrested a criminal. If this sounds familiar, it's because we have seen this movie before. December 1989. Operation Just Cause. The United States invaded Panama, their target? The Panamanian dictator, Manuel Noriega. The charges? Drug trafficking. Noriega was captured, flown to Florida, tried in a U.S. court, and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Today's operation in Caracas is Panama 2.0. The script is identical, but the stakes are infinitely higher. Panama was a small nation. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. And unlike 1989, the world is now a multipolar place. The immediate reaction from Latin America has been panic. Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, neighbors who often criticized Maduro, have immediately condemned the operation. Why? Because of sovereignty. If the U.S. decides it can fly into a capital city and kidnap a head of state whenever it wants, then no leader in the global South is safe. This marks the aggressive return of the Monroe Doctrine, the 19th century policy that claims Latin America is the United States' backyard, off limits to foreign powers. But the real danger lies with the superpowers. China and Russia have called this a clear and violent violation of international law. For Russia, Venezuela was a key strategic ally in the Western Hemisphere. Russian military advisors were on the ground. Russian energy companies had billions invested. By removing Maduro, the US has effectively kicked Russia out of the Americas. China, which is Venezuela's largest creditor, sees this as an act of piracy. The United Nations has issued a dire warning. This sets a dangerous precedent. If the US can decapitate the Venezuelan government overnight, what stops Russia from doing the same in Kiev? What stops China from doing the same in Taipei? The rules of the international order just evaporated. Donald Trump has announced a temporary US administration until a transition government is installed. But history tells us that temporary occupations rarely stay temporary. The hardest part wasn't capturing Maduro. The hardest part begins now. Venezuela is home to armed militias known as colectivos, loyal to the regime. There are thousands of Cuban intelligence operatives embedded in the system. The US military may have won the night, but they now face the prospect of a grueling insurgency. Can the US rebuild a broken economy while fighting an urban guerrilla war? Or have they just walked into another quagmire? A South American Afghanistan? But beyond the borders of Venezuela, a chill is running down the spines of America's adversaries. This operation sends a message louder than any sanction or diplomatic letter. It says that the United States is no longer restrained by borders or diplomatic protocols. Tehran is watching. The leaders of Iran now know that their distance doesn't protect them. Havana is watching. Cuba knows they are historically the next domino. Pyongyang is watching. The capture of Nicolás Maduro proves that the era of proxy wars is over. We have entered the era of direct intervention. The United States has rolled the dice. They have removed a dictator, but in doing so, they may have started a chain reaction that the world isn't ready for. Venezuela was first. The file is closed. The question now isn't what happened in Caracas, it's who is next.